The following is a presentation by Daniel Wheatcroft and Nazira Lenga for the Introduction to Sport and Exercise Psychology module. In the presentation, we will be discussing psychological approaches, theories, and concepts in relation to our chosen case study. Then we will be recommending a relevant intervention for the case study in order to improve the person's performance.
The case study we chose was Case Study 2. John is a very talented hockey player and has made the county team on a number of occasions. However, when it comes to playing in county matches, his play deteriorates and John is often substituted. Before any important game, John believes he will not be good enough on the day. He often lays awake a week before competitions worrying about his performance and how he could let the team down. During the game, he would be playing really well, then suddenly he would start to make mistakes in his passing and tackling, and his frustration would occasionally culminate in him shouting at himself and throwing the stick on the floor. When asked about his performance by the coach, John expresses his concerns over his constant nervous feeling in matches, poor decision making, and his lack of control in his play. These feelings increase up to and including the day of the competition.
Cognitive psychology approach. Cognitive psychology approach can be defined as the branch of psychology studying the mental process involved in perception, learning, memory, and reasoning. Simply, this theory aims to understand mental process. Cognitive theory suggests how an individual's mental process can be influenced through either intrinsic or extrinsic factors. The use of cognitive approach can aid in mental preparation for athletes prior to competitions. Cognitive approach suggests that our thought process is a factor that can affect the way we behave. This is applicable during certain situations when athletes take part in sport performances. Applying this approach to John, if an athlete is anxious prior to competitions, they may start to overthink. In doing so, this can cause performances to deteriorate during the competitions.
Self-determination theory. Self-determination theory states that human behavior is motivated by three primary needs:
Autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy relates to a performer being able to feel in control of their own actions and decisions. Competence refers to a performer's ability and how confident and competent they feel in dealing with what is happening around them. Relatedness talks about a performer's need to feel what they are in some way related to others within the environment. In relation to John, the aspect that affects him the most is competence. This is because when he makes mistakes, he feels that he is unable to cope with continuing to perform at a good enough standard, leading to a decrease in motivation, which overall negatively affects his performance. Anxiety. Anxiety can be defined as a vague, unpleasant, emotional state with qualities of apprehension, dread, distress, and uneasiness. There are 4 types of anxiety: trait, state, cognitive, and somatic. Trait anxiety is where a performer has the tendency to be anxious in all situations. State anxiety refers to when a performer experiences anxiety in certain situations. Cognitive anxiety is when a performer experiences the psychological responses to anxiety, such as stress or an inability to concentrate. And somatic anxiety is when a performer experiences the physiological responses to anxiety, such as increased heart rate or increased sweating. Based on this, John suffers from state anxiety as he only experiences it before big games. He also suffers from cognitive anxiety due to him suffering from sleepless nights in the lead-up and stress during the game.
In order to combat John's anxiety in the lead up to games and during his games, we would prescribe imagery as this would help reduce his anxiety. Imagery can be defined as using all the senses to recreate or create an experience in the mind. It involves taking an experience that a performer has previously experienced and using the information and knowledge stored, which was done so by the senses, to recreate it at a later date. The imagery can be performed at 4 different stages: in training, pre-training, during the game, and post-game. In order to relate these to John, we would recommend that he uses imagery in training in the lead up to the games, as this would help with his pre-game anxiety, which is causing his sleepless nights.
In order to make sure that the imagery that John uses actually benefits his performance, we would suggest using the PETTLEP model of imagery in order to construct it. This involves considering 7 different factors to appropriately adapt the imagery to the specific scenario. These 7 factors are:
Physical. The first factor is a physical factor. The performer should be able to match what they feel in their imagery to how it should feel physically when they perform the action in the game. The performer should focus on physiological outcomes of the performance and what physiological responses they will experience during the action. For John, as he is a talented performer, he will already know how to correctly perform the action and will most likely know what physiological outcomes and responses of his passing and tackling will be. And we would merely suggest to him that during this imagery, he should focus on these aspects in order for it to be successful. Also, we would recommend that he also either holds his hockey stick or wears his kit or even both when performing the imagery to better match the actual game scenario.
environmental. Environmental means that the location of where the imagery is performed directly affects the success of it. So in order to increase the success of the imagery, the location in which it takes place should be as close to the location in which the action would actually take place. So for John, we would recommend that in the days leading up to the game, that if possible, he could actually go to the hockey field and perform the imagery there, as this will help with his sleepless nights. If this is not possible, then he should try to perform the imagery in as close to the environment that the game will take place in, for example, outside or on the same surface that the game will be on. He could also, just prior to the game starting, during the warm-up, implement the imagery, as this will be the closest environment possible that is practical as well, and will reduce his in-game anxiety.
Task. The task involves what actually occurs in the imagery, so what specific actions will be going through their head. In order for it to be successful, the action should be matched to the new level of skill of the performer, so it is not too simple or too complicated. For the performer, as if it is that negatively affected their performance. Also, in order for there to be success, the personal preferences of the performer should be taken into consideration. This means that if there is a certain way that the performer performs the action, then the imagery should involve this. In order to use this on John, we would film him performing the task successfully in a game, then show the videos to him so he has visual knowledge of the way he performs the task successfully.
Timing. Simply put, the imagery of the action should take the same amount of time to run through as it should do to actually perform the skill. With John, he will already know how long his specific actions in his passing and tackling would take to perform, and all we would have to do is make sure that he is not rushing or taking too long on his imagery, as either of these will negatively affect his performance.
Learning. This aspect of the model concerns that if any improvements are to be made to a performer's ability to perform the action, that these improvements should be implemented into their imagery, as not doing this will lead to the imagery and the actual action not correctly matching up and will lead to it not being successful. As John is a talented player, it is very unlikely that he will make any drastic improvements to his passing and tackling, so it will already be close to the perfect model, and therefore this aspect won't affect him as much. All we will do is tell John that if he does make any slight improvements to his passing and tackling, then he should try add these to his imagery, as this will still make improvements to it, even if they are slight.
Emotion. This involves the emotions that the performer experiences when they are performing the action and incorporating them into the imagery, focusing on the positive emotions that are associated with successfully performing skills. With John, we could ask him to remember times that he has successfully made a tackle or a pass and experienced positive feelings as a result. We would then ask him to incorporate these emotions into his imagery.
And finally, perspective. The final part of the model considered which perspective the performer takes while using imagery. Whether it is first person or third person, generally it is preferred to use first person for imagery, as it will allow the performer to recognize what they will be seeing when they are performing the action during the game, making it match more closely. So for John, it will merely tell him how to view the action mentally through his own perspective to better resemble him actually performing it.